Bombshell tonight in the tragic death of a young man, Nolan Wells.
The water was already climbing past their ankles by the time anyone understood how much trouble they were in. Somewhere out in the middle of the Mississippi Sound, a small boat was losing its fight to stay above the surface. The engine straining, the deck tilting, a group of teenagers scrambling in every direction at once. One of them had a phone pressed to his ear, begging a stranger on the other end to send help before the water won. And on the shrinking strip of sand behind them, one boy was still standing on the island, watching the only ride home pull away. That boy's name was Nolan. To get to that party, you have to want to be there. Horn Island sits roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi coast. A thin barrier island you cannot drive to, cannot walk to, cannot reach at all without a boat and someone willing to bring you back. On the 4th of July, a group of friends made that trip together. Only some of them would come home. The call for help went out to a private towing company, and it is hard to listen to even now. You can hear a young man's voice cracking under the weight of what is happening around him, the chaos behind him swallowing half his words, the fear of people who have just realized the water is not going to stop. For a few days, that recording sat quietly in the public record, treated as nothing more than the sound of a terrible afternoon on the water. Then someone slowed it down. Then someone sharpened it. And what people believed they could hear underneath the noise turned this from a private tragedy into something the entire country could not look away from. 2 days after that boat limped back to shore, a park ranger found Nolan in the water off the northwestern edge of the island. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He played football. He was the kind of kid who, as a little boy, would dance in the middle of his parents' arguments just to make them stop. He went to a holiday party with people he had known since high school, and instead of coming home, he came back to a funeral. His mother has stood in front of cameras more times than any parent ever should, asking the only question that has ever mattered to her: what happened to my son? And this is what has kept this case burning for weeks. Nobody has been able to give her a straight answer. 2 separate examinations of his body have now been carried out. Neither has produced a cause of death. The word that keeps coming back is undetermined. And for a family in mourning, undetermined is not an answer. What happened next moved faster than the truth ever could. A single clip, reportedly cleaned up and passed to tens of millions of people, convinced strangers all over the country that they already knew what had happened out there, before a single expert had confirmed a word of it. The threats began. The FBI was pulled in, and when a forensic analyst finally sat down with the original recording and the version everyone was sharing, he found that they were not even the same file. Tonight, we are going to walk through every piece of this, carefully, in order, and always separating what has actually been confirmed from what simply went viral. Because the true story of what happened to Nolan Wells is more complicated, more human, and far more important than any 30-second clip could ever capture. Stay with me all the way to the end, because the one detail that reframes this entire case is the one almost everyone scrolled right past. Before we get into it, a quick note. This is a difficult story about the loss of a young person, so take care of yourself as we go through it. And if you're new here, take a second to subscribe so you never miss an update on this case. Then tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. To understand what happened on the water that afternoon, you have to start with where they were going. Horn Island is not a place you stumble onto. It sits about 10 miles off the coast of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, part of a chain of barrier islands managed by the National Park Service. There are no roads to it and no ferry. The only way on or off is a private boat. On the 4th of July, a group of friends who had known each other since high school made the crossing together to spend the holiday there. Nolan Xavier Wells, 18 years old, was one of them. He was the only black teenager in the group, a detail that would matter a great deal later, even though nobody was thinking about it that morning. Nolan was not a stranger to this kind of day. He was a 2025 graduate of Ocean Springs High School, a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, and a general business major who was days away from reporting back for football practice. He would have turned 19 the following month. His high school coach described him as humble and hardworking, a leader by example. His father would later call him a silent leader, More action than words, the kind of person his teammates looked to without him having to ask. They spent the afternoon on the island, the way thousands of people do every summer. Sometime around 3 o'clock, Nolan was last seen by the people who would soon be answering questions about him. What happened next is where the accounts begin to split. According to his friends, Nolan chose to stay behind to keep talking with a 19-year-old named Katie McCormack and told them he would find another way back to shore. Katie's sister, Gracie, has publicly disputed that version, saying Nolan was ready to leave with everyone else. Both accounts cannot be true at once, and figuring out which one is accurate has become one of the central questions of this entire investigation. What is not in dispute is that the boat ran into trouble on the way back. Somewhere out in the Mississippi Sound, it started taking on water, and the family's own account says the group left sometime after 4 o'clock, once the bilge pump gave out. One of the friends called Sea Tow, a private towing company, and reported that the vessel was sinking and needed help.
We're sinking. Can you all please come?
And is everybody on board in good health otherwise?
Yeah, everybody's on board.
That single recorded call is the reason this case would later explode across the country, but on the day itself, it was something much simpler. A group of teenagers trying to get a failing boat back to the mainland before it went under. They made it back. Nolan was not with them. By that evening, he still had not returned. His mother, Christine Wansley, reported him missing. What started as a search for a teenager who might have caught a later ride turned, over the next day and a half, into something far more serious. The search stretched past 40 hours. Volunteers joined the effort, including the United Cajun Navy, a group that assists in water searches across the Gulf Coast. One of its leaders was flying a plane above Horn Island when the search finally reached its end. On the morning of July 6, around 8:45, a National Park Service ranger located Nolan in the water near the northwestern end of the island. He had been missing for 2 days. The news reached his family almost immediately, and so did the first official conclusion. According to his mother, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter told her, less than an hour after Nolan was recovered, that he believed the death was an accident and that he saw no sign of foul play. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind would later say there were no immediate signs of injury. On the surface, an accidental drowning fit the setting. The waters around Horn Island have a reputation, and the currents there can turn dangerous fast. The county coroner's office had handled drownings from these barrier islands before, but the explanation that fit the location did not fit everything the family knew about their son. Nolan could swim. He was an athlete. To the people who knew him best, the word accident landed less like an answer and more like an assumption made before anyone had looked closely. And there were details that did not sit right. The most significant one involved Nolan's phone. Rather than being recovered with him, the phone was reportedly found in the possession of one of the friends who had been on the island that day. For the family, that raised a question nobody had answered. How did his phone make it back to the mainland when he did not? Within days, they hired civil rights attorney Ben Crump, whose team announced an independent investigation, pointing to what they described as contradictions in the case and a lack of information coming from official sources. From that moment, the death of Nolan Wells stopped being a quiet tragedy on a remote island. It became a national story, followed and argued over by millions of people who had never set foot in Mississippi. That is exactly where things began to go wrong, because the public did not wait for the investigation to catch up. If you want to follow this the way the evidence actually unfolds, instead of the way it's spread online, subscribe now and stay with it. Because this is where a 30-second audio clip rewrote the entire case overnight, and where almost everything the internet had decided about Nolan Wells started to come apart. The recording at the center of all this came from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and it did not reach the public in its original form. Before anyone outside the investigation ever heard it, parts of it had been redacted, account numbers, phone numbers, and identifying information stripped out. That detail matters more than it first appears, and it comes back shortly. What the public got was a few chaotic minutes of a boat in trouble. What the internet made of it was something else entirely. By the time the audio surfaced, this was no longer a local story. Photographs from the trip, a black teenager surrounded by a largely white group of friends, had turned Nolan's death into a national conversation about race and about how young black men's deaths get investigated. Civil rights leader Al Sharpton took up the cause. Commentators from Stephen A. Smith to Ibram X. Kendi weighed in. A fundraiser for the family passed $230,000. Tyler Perry covered the funeral costs, and former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick paid for an independent autopsy. Nolan's father gave the family's first interview on national television, and their attorney kept the case on cable news night after night. Into that already charged atmosphere dropped one short audio clip. The entertainment outlet TMZ took the released recording, ran it through enhancement software, and published a cleaned-up version.
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking.
And what do you want to do? Do you want to be towed back?
I want to get this boat unsank and towed back, yes. There are 0 adults on board. Nobody here is over the age of 21.
Listeners began isolating phrases out of the background noise, and within a day the clips were circulating to tens of millions of people, all carrying the same claim, that the voices proved something criminal had happened on that boat. The theory needed a face, and the internet chose one. A member of the friend group, Bart Edmiston Jr., was named again and again across social media as the person responsible. Precision matters here, because the accusation did not have it. Edmiston has never been arrested. He has never been charged. His identification as a suspect came from strangers listening to a processed file, not from anyone running the investigation. The people who were actually on the boat told a different story. Warren Hudson, one of Nolan's friends, came forward on a podcast and explained what he says the recording actually captured: the sound of a boat going under, not the sound of a crime. He described a friend shouting Nolan's name, trying to get him to leave the island with the group before the water forced them out. In Hudson's account, the panic on the tape happened while Nolan was still on the island behind them, not on the boat at all. Edmiston's attorney, Russell Latino, went further on national television. He called the enhanced audio doctored, paired with a transcript built to make people hear words that were never there. He said his client had cooperated from the beginning and had let investigators inspect his boat, his phone, and his GPS without requiring a warrant. Another friend, Trayston Shepard, spoke up about a separate viral video that many had read as a confrontation, explaining that the yelling in it was simply him. There was also an account that undercut the theory at its foundation. 2 witnesses reportedly told TMZ they had seen Nolan still on Horn Island after the friend's boat had already left. If that holds, Nolan was not on the vessel when any of those background voices were recorded. Then came the analysis almost no one who shared the clip ever saw. Robert Freed, a digital forensics expert, sat down with both files, the original the state had released and the enhanced version spreading online, and compared them directly. On Jesse Weber Live, and later on a panel with Nancy Grace, he laid out 3 findings. The enhanced version ran about 20 seconds longer than the original. It carried a different digital fingerprint, meaning it had been altered enough to set it apart from the source. And when he tested the phrases everyone claimed to hear against the original recording, he could not verify a single one of them. Then he made the point that reframes the whole controversy. Because the state had already redacted the file it released, the complete, unedited original recording has never been public. What millions of people spent weeks dissecting was an enhanced copy of an already altered file, and he described something anyone can recognize in themselves. Once you are told which words to listen for, your mind fills in the gaps and you start to hear them, whether or not they are actually there. That is the line between evidence and a rumor with good production values. If you would rather follow the forensic version of a case than the version a viral clip decides for you, subscribe. That is the whole reason this channel exists. Which leaves one question. If the audio does not hold up, why are federal agents involved at all? Not to identify a voice, despite what some headlines promised. The FBI's role has centered on the threats that followed the clip. As strangers grew certain they knew who was responsible, people connected to the case began receiving threats serious enough and across enough state lines to trigger federal jurisdiction. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the lead agency on the death investigation itself. The federal role is support, not command. and much of that support has gone toward protecting people from the fallout of a theory the forensic evidence does not back up. While the internet argued over the audio, the actual investigation moved slowly and quietly, the way real investigations do. 2 examinations of Nolan's body were carried out. The first, the official autopsy, was performed by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office on July 7th, the day after he was found. The second was arranged by the family. On July 10th, Dr. Roger A. Mitchell, Jr., a forensic pathologist and former chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C., conducted an independent examination. On July 22nd, at a press conference during the NOP convention in Chicago, the results of that independent autopsy were announced. The cause and manner of death were listed as undetermined, pending further investigation. Mitchell was direct about why he could not say more. By the time he received the body, it had already gone through the state's examination and a period of decomposition, both of which limit what a second pathologist can establish. He did not have access to all of the remains or to a toxicology report. Another forensic pathologist, Dr. Priya Banerjee, explained that this is common. A second, independent examiner often works with far less than the first, and second examinations carry built-in limitations. In plain terms, undetermined did not mean nothing was found. It meant that what remained could not answer the question on its own. For weeks, that was where the medical picture stood. Then, on the final day of July, officials confirmed that the state's own autopsy was complete. Its findings were not made public. Instead, they were sealed and set to be handed to a grand jury. That grand jury is the next real step in this case. The Jackson County District Attorney, Angel Myers McElrath, has explained that presenting a death to a grand jury is standard procedure in the county for any death that is not plainly natural or a routine accident. She has been clear that convening one does not mean a crime occurred. It means the evidence will be reviewed by citizens who decide whether charges are warranted. Until then, the autopsy, the toxicology, and the witness interviews stay out of public view, which the DA says is meant to protect the integrity of that process. By this point, investigators had interviewed roughly 60 witnesses as they worked to reconstruct Nolan's final hours. His phone was set to be examined jointly by the family's own investigators and law enforcement together. The governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves, had weighed in publicly, and a former FBI agent, Jennifer Coffindaffer, who reviewed the evidence available to the public, offered an assessment that surprised people expecting a darker conclusion. When she added it all together, the witness accounts, the surveillance, the Coast Guard communications, the known conditions of the water around the island, it looked to her like an accident, but she was careful to say she was not closing any door until the full picture was in front of her. And this is where the case sits now, caught between 2 families who want opposite things from the same set of facts. Nolan's parents are still asking the public for help. His father, speaking about the attacks aimed at their family, asked simply where the empathy had gone. His mother has pleaded with anyone who knows anything, friends or strangers, to come forward, saying the family cannot rest until they have answers. On the other side, the friends who were with Nolan that day, and their families, have offered a $50,000 reward for information and have threatened legal action against content creators who keep insisting they were responsible for his death. The tension has already spilled into the open. A man was arrested for making threats against a public official connected to the case. There is no trial to tell you about. No one has been charged, no verdict has been reached, and no one has been sentenced, because the investigation that would decide any of that is still unfinished. Everything is still in motion. The sealed autopsy, the grand jury that has not yet convened, the phone that has not yet been jointly examined. What this case has become is a study in how fast a story can outrun the facts. A 30-second clip, enhanced from an already edited file, convinced millions of people they knew what happened to Nolan Wells long before a single expert had verified any of it. The threats came. The FBI came. And when the forensic work was finally done, it did not support the theory that started it all. What remains, underneath everything, is the same thing the family began with: an 18-year-old who went to a holiday party and never came home, and a cause of death that still reads undetermined. That answer is coming, one way or another, when the grand jury does its work. We will be here when it does. If you want to know what the evidence actually shows the moment it becomes official, not the version that trends first, subscribe, and we will bring it to you as soon as the facts are real.